Well, today is a milestone. Before I begin, I'm going to start with Ezekiel chapter 1, but to say that today is January 1st of 2023, and I've done 300 videos in the last year. Actually, only 291 were on the Bible. The other 9 were various things that came into play during the year. Very happy to have done a whole year of videos. And here we go. I'll be finishing up Ezekiel and Daniel, then moving into the New Testament. The New Testament may move a little faster, not because I want to shortcut it, but because it's more well known, and to stop and talk about every little story and all the stuff. And one thing, it's like the Gospels are kind of like the Torah. You can move pretty fast through it because it's pretty self-explanatory. You don't have to spend a lot of time. Jesus spoke to fishermen and milkmaids and shepherds, and spoke to common people, and he used common language, like a lost coin, or a prodigal son, or a loving father, or any of those things that are just well known. Just by telling the story, you don't have to break it down into its most common parts. There's a sense of irreducible complexity. I'm going to tell you that the Bible is at its level of irreducible complexity. There's a point to where you take something apart so much that it doesn't hold, it doesn't cohese together. It becomes more confusing. If you get something too close to you, you can't see what it is. If you get it too far away, if you're taking apart something, there's a point to where you can take parts off of a car to where it won't be a car anymore. It won't function like a car because you took off too many parts. And sometimes when we study the Bible, we break it down into words, and we break it down into, what does this word mean and what does that word mean? Well, if you back up and look at context, context always reveals meaning, but not always does meaning show context, So I won't go into that too far. Starting with Ezekiel, then, to finish out the Old Testament and finish Ezekiel and Daniel, then go into the New Testament. But yes, it is January 1st. Happy New Year. Looking at Ezekiel, I made another graph, which I make to explain things here. And it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, and the 5th day of the month, I was among the captives by the river Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. Now, this should fit right where it is between Jeremiah and Daniel. It's like a connection, if you will. And it was on the 5th day of the month, which was in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity. The word of the Lord expressly came unto Ezekiel the priest near the river Chebar. But let's back up. It says that in the 5th day of the month, which was in the 5th year. So he places this. We'll see that where Isaiah and Jeremiah often will place it in time, especially when you see here in Daniel, in Ezekiel and in Daniel and Jeremiah, they'll say, well, in this year and in the year of this person's reign, before we calculated AD and BC, at the time of Christ. Before the time of Christ, how did they calculate time? Well, it was in a person's reign. In a certain king's reign, in a certain year of a certain king's reign, then historians can go and line these kings up and get a pretty decent idea of how history fell, by and large. There's a book I have, I need to pull out, it's called Usher's Annals of the World, where he's taken all the history of all the cultures that we have written record of and puts them together into a timeline. And they're based upon what king lived when and how long did they live. And at a certain time in that king's reign, this happened and this happened, or this person said this person said that. So that's why we see this in Isaiah. We see it in Jeremiah. We actually saw it in 1st and 2nd Kings in the reign of this guy's, or in this person's reign, or in the 5th year of their reign. Now, I made a chart because I was sitting here today trying to make a chart that would work. And I'm going to go over it real quick. Remember, we saw charts about the reign of the kings. Here, we're taking the reign from Josiah through Zedekiah. Then you have, of course, the 70-year reign. And then here we have Cyrus and Darius. Also, when Zerubbabel and Joshua went down. This was before Ezra and Nehemiah. And so we get to see how all of these fall together. And you get to see where Jeremiah and Daniel and Ezekiel fit into all of this. And you can take a picture of this if you need to. I'm going to refer back to it. But you see the kings, Josiah He was for 31 years. Then you had Jehoahaz was only for 3 months. He didn't last long. Jehoiachin was for 11 years. Joachim was 11 years. You had 8 years for Joachim. You had 11 years for Zedekiah, and then that was the end of the kingdom. Then you had your 70 years. I also put how old they were up here when they started to reign. 8 years old for Josiah. You get the idea. You can read that across about when they reigned. Now we have Jeremiah. Now that's not his birth line, and I'm guessing on his death line. We do know that he says that he was a young man in the 30th year of Josiah. Now this was 1 year before we would have this problem. And remember, Jehoahaz was only there for 3 months. So really you could almost connect Jehoiakim to Josiah, because that 3 months is not going to matter much. So here he was, a year before is when he was called, and he went through all these kings doing prophecy, and then we believe historically that he died right after the fall of Jerusalem, when they went down into Egypt, and then he was stoned to death. That's Jeremiah. Daniel lived a long time, and he could have lived even over a century. You have him saying that he was a young man. We don't know how old he was. He was a young man. I'd have to check and see if there's any history to how old he was. But he talks about here how the children were taken. And at the time of just after Jehoiakim had come into place, remember Nebuchadnezzar was taking people out little bits at a time, whittling down Jerusalem. And so he takes Daniel out with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's not their Jewish names. I don't remember them right now. I'd have to look them up. I wish I memorized those. And it shows him there, and he goes through the next, of course, 2 kings. But he's in Babylon, and he's in Babylon for the whole 70 years. And then sometime after, we don't know when, we do know that he talks with Darius, or he speaks in the time of Darius. So we know that he lived 70 years plus maybe a couple more. We know that he lived here, I put it as 27 years if you add these kingdoms together. And he might have been, what, 5 years old, 10 years old? We don't know. He was old enough to speak. I mean, he's old enough to conjugate, you know, to say, well, I'm a young man, why should you listen to me, kind of thing. That's what Daniel was about. I mean, you know, that was Jeremiah, actually. But we don't know how old he was when these children were coming in. I'm confusing my prophets. We don't know how old he was. You know, he could have been an infant for all we know. Or he could have been 5 years old. I don't think he was a older man than that. And in this time frame, living in Babylon, is when he was made into a eunuch, so were his friends, and they started serving. And we know that Nebuchadnezzar goes all the way back even to this time. So Nebuchadnezzar went on through all of this. So looking at this, now Ezekiel down here, I didn't look up any extra biblical information. There are probably lots of it on here, but I only wanted to stick with what's biblically important. I don't know how old he was here, and I don't know when he died, but I will tell you about the timeline of Ezekiel. And so Ezekiel was there. And he says, in the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity, Jehoiachin's captivity. Okay, so we see then Jehoiachin reigned for 8 years, and then he got his captivity here. So 5 years into his captivity is when we're starting the book of Ezekiel. And it goes to about 12 years after the fall of Jerusalem. So in Jehoiachin's lifetime is when we have the book of Ezekiel, although he wasn't reigning at all. And we have, of course, it's 8 years before the fall and 12 years after. So that's about a 20-year gap. And Ezekiel will also say things like, we begin with the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity, and he says what happened there. Then we have in the 6th year, he gets another vision. In the 7th and 8th year, he gets another vision. In the 10th year, he gets another vision. In the 20th year, which the 20th year of the captivity. So we have him there, at least 20 years having these visions, and he's in this captivity. I could look up historically and find out what happens to Ezekiel. Maybe I will. But just for our knowledge of putting this book into time, we have it right there. When he writes this book, Jeremiah is still alive for a good 2/3 of it. Daniel is alive for all of it. And so we see where those guys run together. He's still in Jerusalem. He is in Babylon, and he is with some of the captives over at the river Chedar, which I'd have to look up and see where that's at. I don't know if these two people ever met, but God is working in their lives. Now, starting Ezekiel, the whole first chapter, it's kind of a strange thing. It has a lot of spooky stuff. Some people just run right through it, and so not want to spend too much time with it. Most of it's pretty self-explanatory, but there's a lot of descriptors. And we need to use those descriptors in our minds. Be careful going to the internet and someone else's subjective understanding of this. Because read it for what it says and let your own imagination take hold. Now, I'm going to give you what I imagine I see. Now, maybe you should see different, but it should be similar. I've had people write to where, the four faces were, one on each side. Well, I think there were four faces facing front. It also talks about their wings that had hands under their wings. Well, what that did mean under the wing pits, that would be still, if I'm out here, it talked about hooves at the feet, but you were presuming there's legs. Okay, we're going to go with the presumption of legs. If you're talking about hooves and feet, you presume there's legs. And then you're presuming that the hands are at the end of the arms. And so underneath the wings, you had these hands were underneath the wings. And you had two sets of wings, 4 wings on each side. And we also had these things that move back and forth, and they move like lightning, forward and back and forth, and sometimes up. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's how they moved, like lightning. It was very scary what he saw. He goes that I was there by the river Chebar, and I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north. So this whirlwind started coming. And there was a great cloud and fire enfolded on it. Okay, so a thing of fire was moving about. And there was a lot of brightness to it. And out of the mist came 4 living creatures. And each one had 4 faces, and every one had 4 wings. So we got 4 wings. 1, 2, 3, 4, and build it in your mind. Don't worry about going to the Google. You'll only get somebody else's interpretation. Try to look at your own. And it says here, the wings were joined together, and they turned not when they went. So it wasn't like he turned sideways like a bird, or up and down. He moved like this, backwards and forwards, and up and down, and around, and didn't turn. So that, that's how they moved. And the wings were joined together, and they turned not when they went, and they went straight forward. And on the likeness of the faces were 4. They 4 had the face of a man, a face of a lion on the right side. And they 4 had the face on the ox on the left side, and the 4 also had the face of an eagle. I'm thinking there are 4 faces in a row. He talks about the man. He centers on the man. Then there's a face to the right, which is the lion. And the face to the left is the oxen. And, of course, the eagle would be over here. So you have 4 faces staring at you. And this thing, that would be very scary, but to see these, but they're very there, and they just move like this. And they went straight forward, and whether the spirit went, they went, and they turned not when they went. Like I said, they didn't turn. And they were like burning coals of fire, and they had appearances of lamps that went up and down the living creature. So let's say this glowing lamp seemed to go up and down as it moved, up and down as the wings went over. And the hands are there under the wings, and the 4 faces are looking at you. And the living creatures ran and returned. So ran and returned. This kind of thing. It was very scary what was happening to him. And then he saw the appearance of wheels, and their work was like the color of bdellium. And they 4 had one likeness. So there were 4 wheels that looked like one another. And they were beside the angels. And they were huge. These things were massive. He says that they went up. And the 4 likenesses, and they looked like a wheel within a wheel. And they went upon their 4 sides, and they turned not when they went. So they kind of moved like a ball, moving around. And a ball does have 4 sides. So you're turning, because a ball has a bottom, a left, a right, and an up. So that would be the 4 sides of a ball. You're not moving forward. You're moving like this, and you're rolling this way. You're rolling that way. You're moving back. You're moving forward. So that's what it does. he also says that, and the living creatures went, and the wheels went with them, and the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, and the wheels went up. So these two stayed together. And the spirit was to go. They went whither with their spirit, and the wheels lifted up against them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. Now it's interesting, you got these things moving, but the spirit of these things was in the wheels. The wheels were actually where the spirit was. These were just like an external appendage, if you will. Now you didn't see the connection, but the spirit was in the wheel. This was just another thing that was there. Probably a typification, a typification. And the likeness of the firmament above the heads was the color of crystal. Very scary. And the firmament upon the wings straight up. And he talks about how the atmosphere was around it. And I heard a noise of the wings was like the noise of great waters, and the voice of the Almighty, the voice of speech, as the noise of the host. And they stood and they let down their wings. And there was a voice from the firmament that was over their heads where they stood. So you've got this thing happening, but in the area above it. And then, by the way, there's a scripture that I'm looking for. It says these things were very dreadful. As for the rings, they were so high that they were dreadful. Now, these things were not small things. These things were taking up the whole sky, and they were very dreadful, very big. I drew a picture of what I thought it might be, using my imagination. You know, a wheel within a wheel, where you got one wheel turning, you got another wheel on the inside turning a different way. And then it's a brightly colored, and you've got these things rolling, and it's rolling this way, rolling that way, rolling this way, and the internal one is rolling a different way. And it almost looked like also a two-dimensional tunnel. I remember the old TV series called The Time Tunnel, and they had something that looked like this. You know, again, is this a tunnel? Is it a three-dimensional or representation of, it's a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional object? You know, was it a wheel or was it a tunnel? It doesn't say that it's a tunnel, but I'm going to say it has that effect. Because sometimes when you look at perspective, you can see this as a wheel or a wheel, but you also see it as a tunnel where these things are going backwards. You know, so there's a tunnel here, and then we go back into a small tunnel, or like a hole in the ground or something. But it looks like a wheel. We're going to go with a wheel. I'm not going to get too far into anything that's speculative like that. If it says it's a wheel, it's a wheel. It says it's a wheel within a wheel, it's a wheel within a wheel. So we're going to go with that. But it's huge and it's dreadful. And God starts speaking, and we're going to get to that in chapter 2 tomorrow. But there's firmament over the heads, and he sees a throne, and there's a likeness of a man upon it. So he sees a throne above the wheels, above these living creatures. It doesn't say the word angels here. It says living creatures. And they're breathing. They're living four-dimensional creatures, by the way. Let's not say that this is a spiritual thing. This is it is a spiritual thing, but they are living creatures. They're not dead things, in other words. And we see in Revelation that these things are living. That are there saying, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. And all the cherubim that are around the throne, and all the 24 elders, they're all living things. These are living things. They're not dead things. And it was the likeness of a man, and he had the color of amber, as the appearance of as fire round about, and his upward appearance was like that, but his loins downward were as the appearance of fire. So you had like an amber thing, a glowing thing, and then you had fire. And there's this person in here. We're going to see this person come up several times, especially in Daniel, when they go in, there's the likeness of the man that was inside the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But here we have him. And as the appearance of a bow that was in the clouds in the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. And there was appearance in the likeness of the glory of God. And I fell on my face and heard a voice that spake. Tomorrow we're going to look at the voice that spake. But build this in your mind. You've got these four cherubs, but these four living creatures moving around. They've got their four wings. They've got their hands under their wings. They have four faces. It's very terrible. And you've got these huge wheels within wheels moving back and forth. And there's four of them moving all over the place. And above them is a throne. And the person that's sitting upon it is amber from top to middle. And he's fire going down. And the voice of God comes from the firmament, not from the wheel, and not from the living things. So God is above all of that, and he's going to start speaking. So this happens again. We're looking at this happened in the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity. So we're heading right there in the middle. Let me hold this up again. And we'll see where all of that fits together. And remember, Jeremiah is still alive, so is Daniel. And this is all happening right there in this timeline. Jerusalem has not fallen yet. And here is God talking about the restoration. And it's going to be wonderful things. He's talking about the restoration here. And we're going to end with talking about a wonderful temple that Messiah is going to build. So that's where we're sitting. And this is what's going on. And tomorrow we do chapter 2. Welcome to 2024. Thank you.